across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our Millennial Round Table, and certainly, as always, we have around the round table, first of all, to-be doctor very soon, Dr. Nicholas J. Pitts here.
Well, hello. It's so good to be here with you all.
Yes, and again, I might just mention that we're going to work a little bit later off of some of the daily briefings. We've, of course, posted those on the website, so if people want to read ahead, there will be a test at the end of the broadcast, right?
But it's going to be such an easy test, especially if I'm the one that's conducting it.
Let me also introduce our other roundtable guest, and that's Reverend Ryan Waller. Studied philosophy and religion at University of Southern California. He is a USC Trojan. Benedicture also graduated from USC as well. Earned a Juris Doctor and Masters of Theological Studies at SMU. Actually has studied and actually practiced law for a while, and then felt called to teach and to preach, and has spent the last 3 years at All Saints Episcopal School before actually then being involved in the Church of the Incarnation. And so, Ryan, thank you so very much for being with us today here on Point of View.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the church and what you're doing there, because this is something I've heard about from other individuals about how you're really beginning to take this church in a little bit different direction with some of the leading and teaching that you're doing. I'd love to have more. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Church of the Incarnation is an amazing place to be. It's an historic church. It's been in Dallas for more than 130 years.
Yes.
And I lead what's called the Uptown services.
Uptown, right.
So we're an Episcopalian church, so we're a liturgical church. And what we have going is just this really vibrant parish. We've got 7 services on a Sunday. And what we have happening is these concurrent services. So we've got our really high mass traditional services, and then we have what I lead, which is called Uptown, which is still liturgical. We're still doing communion every Sunday, but it's in the sort of more common language, and it's not traditional choral music. So we have a band that's doing some really interesting sort of Texas kind of folk rock infused with ancient hymns and psalms, and it's pretty wild, and it's just a dynamic place and a wonderful, fun place to be.
That's so fun. That's so awesome. So talk to me about this. Are you seeing more of a millennial push towards that? Are there millennials that are really interested in kind of that sense of I want to hold on to the past, but want to see like a new face to the past here in the present?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what I see a lot of are folks that are coming in that have a really solid biblical background. So maybe they came up in the
right.
Bible church or the Baptist church. They know their Bible, their faith is real, their faith is active, and they get to a certain point where they begin to look for something a little different, something just, they don't know how to put their finger on it. And what happens oftentimes is when they walk into our services, something just clicks and they say, that's it. That's what was missing. I didn't know. For them and for me, this is how I grew up. Church was basically 2 things. You worshiped for, half of the service, and then you had about a 45-minute sermon or whatever it was, which is, I am really grateful for that heritage. I mean, that's what made me who I am. But for the service to involve responsive readings, right? Standing up, kneeling, all these sorts of different elements that we do that harken back to how the church, is really worshipped from the very beginning. And then with the central practice of the Eucharist, it's just like entering into this world that they haven't experienced, and they love it, and it's great. But,
I love it. It sounds like they're quite literally epitomizing what William Wordsworth said, right? So the intimations of immortality that are within us, right? Of what the writer of Ecclesiastes would say, that eternity has been placed in us. But possibly, because I know everybody's reading Jürgen Habermas right now, and so Jürgen puts it so well, and he says, we're haunted by a sense of something more.
Something more,
and,
right.
And so it's this yearning that we're starting to see. And I love how what you're doing at the Uptown services, it really is tapping into that eternal yearning, that restlessness until our heart finds its hope and home in thee, which is just Jesus. And so
that's
so
exactly
interesting.
Right.
When you walk into the great cathedrals in Europe, what do you tend to do? Look up.
Yeah.
You tend to realize that there is more to you, and some of those cathedrals took longer to build than people lived. And so you have a sense of continuity and purpose and transcendence, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. So especially in a world that is increasingly doubting truth claims, there's no such thing as absolute truth, and they're absolutely sure of it, that truth can be presented in such a way, in an indirect fashion. The mind is particularly delighted by that, is what Augustine found. And I think that's so fascinating. What's happening is you're honoring the past, but doing it in such a way that's honoring it to be able to make it not only relevant, but even more so helping us to be able to see the applicability and the wisdom that's come because it's survived the ages. I love what's happening.
Yeah, that's right. And similarly, I mean, at Church of the Incarnation, we've recently built a new Gothic chapel where the Uptown services worship. And what we've done in there, in the wisdom of our rector, which is our senior pastor, Bishop Anthony Burton, this chapel is Gothic and evokes that sense of transcendence and beauty and just absolute awe and worship of God, while also integrating the technology that we use. So when you go in there, it's really sort of a one-of-a-kind chapel in that you've got this transcendent, these huge, high archways, beautiful stained glass, but we also have screens that are built into the woodwork because we don't actually have the Book of Common Prayer in the chapel. Everything that we use, I mean, it's a common prayer service, but everything's projected up on the screens. There's a spot for the band. All of the speakers and the subs are hidden. And so it really is this melding, exactly like you say, the ancient and the modern. And it's really fun.
Yeah, I think the whole beauty concept too, I think, is just something that continues to reverberate today. I mean, even I think about just the significance and just the prevalence of street art. You know, there used to be a day that graffiti was seen as something bad, but now it's almost, if you go to a downtown, specifically, we'll think about Dallas, for example, there is all sorts of street art movements and pictures that are littering the downtown, not because they're bad, but because business owners are seeing that individuals will use social media and they'll take pictures of it. So they're using this beauty on just in random spaces to be able to use it, one, for their advertising purposes, but two, from the human experience side, I think it points to our gravitation towards beauty, which again, I would just say that it echoes what we've always known to be true, that we gravitate towards our home, which our God says in Psalm 52 that he shines forth in perfect beauty from Zion.
You know, you talked about the idea that eternity is in the heart of every individual, and so that's why even a non-believer comes in there and there's something, if you will, they sometimes say it's mystical or spiritual because they can't give a good biblical word for it, and so that's certainly what you see in the architecture. But I need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to work our way through one of the articles that I felt really would be appropriate. We've discussed it a little bit before with you, Nick, and also with Allie Beth, who is off doing the Blaze today. 5 things millennials wish the church would be, and that first one is our church real or relevant? And we have 2 very different church experiences, I think, illustrated by the 2 individuals sitting across the table, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm from Tennessee, so I don't have socks on right now. So,
so you know, and of course, you're graduated from Dallas Baptist University,
right?
And then we're talking about, of course, what is happening in the Church of Incarnation. And so there are just all sorts of things that I thought would be really appropriate, because sometimes in trying to attract you millennials to church, we think, well, it's the band or it's the group or it's whether somebody's wearing skinny jeans or whatever it might be. And I think we're going to find out very quickly that there are some other very important issues. So that's one of the articles we've posted today. Then I wanted you to get to know Ryan Wall a little bit better. So one of the things we've done is we've posted one of his blog posts on the Jesus Secret. And so you can go to his website, which is ryancaseywaller.com, but we also have a link on the website. And then we'll get into what technology is doing to us, the millennials. Oh boy, we got a lot to cover. And then we'll pick out a few things from the daily briefing. And I don't know how we'll get it all in 2 hours, but we'll give it a try right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, tax day this year landed on April 18th, but I took the time to remind my listeners that the more important day was April 23rd. That is Tax Freedom Day. According to the Tax Foundation, that is the day when the average American has paid off all of his or her taxes, federal, state, and local. Of course, this varies by state to state. Tax Freedom Day for people in Mississippi lands on April 5th, but it doesn't come until May 21st for people living in Connecticut. You know, there's another day that is important. That is the Cost of Government Day, that not only counts all the taxes, but the cost of mandatory federal, state, and local regulations. Now, it turns out that last year, the Cost of Government Day did not arrive until July 6th. In other words, you spend more than half of the year, 186 days, to pay what the government demands in taxes and regulations. President Trump and Congress are working to reform the tax code, which reads like a foreign language to most Americans. How complex is the tax code? In his book, A Fine Mess, T.R. Reid provides this example. Enter 6% of the smaller of line 40, or the value of your Archer MSAs on December 31st, 2015, including the 2015 contributions made in 2016. Include this amount on Form 1040, line 58A, or Form 1040 NR, line 56B. How many pages in the tax code? Some say that it is 70,000 pages long, but that is the actual standard federal tax reporter, which also includes a legislative history. The actual tax code by itself is about 2,600 pages, but either number is overwhelming and perhaps the best argument for why we need to reform the tax code. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Millennial Round Table, if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller. And let me get to this first article. We have talked about a little of it before, but now I think it's even more relevant. 5 things millennials wish the church would be. The first, is our church real or relevant? And Ryan, this idea of relevance, some people think that relevance means that it's got to be really hip and got to be cool, and you got to dress, with holes in your jeans, skinny, tight jeans, got to have really loud music, drums, maybe soft lights. And after a while, people say it looks like a cocktail lounge, doesn't look like a church. You are a good example of a liturgical church that's attracting millennials. So obviously they're looking for something other than the exterior kind of experience that we were talking about, aren't they?
That's right. Although I have to confess, I wear a clerical collar and I also wear skinny jeans. So, both
well,
sort of exist together. But yeah, I mean, is it real or relevant? The church has to be both, and
Yes,
the church
of course.
is both,
Yeah.
right? But this sense of relevancy, the gospel of Jesus Christ, right, when proclaimed, is and always will be relevant.
Very true.
Right? If this is what we believe is the hope of the world, which it is, it'll always be relevant. Now, this term just has taken on all new kinds of
That's
meaning,
true.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the past few years, and so as you say, the church often feels like it has to make itself look like the culture, right, to attract folks in. It doesn't have to do that. At times, it can be helpful, and it's wildly successful, right, in different locations with that. But what matters more, and I would like to talk a little more about the relevance, but that it's real, right? People are looking.
Authenticity?
For God,
Yeah, can
right.
we use that word?
Authenticity.
Yeah.
I honestly think probably, and I know the article mentions it, that it seems to me that millennials, more than anything else, are looking for a church that is authentic. I mean, I think that undergirds everything.
Yeah, so I think churches need to be really relevant, maybe. No, okay. No, bad joke, sorry. I'll be here all week. And so I think what we continue to see is, again, I just think it's a false dichotomy that we have to choose one between the other.
Yeah.
It's the sense that, yes, the church is real because quite literally it's the one that worships and centers itself around the one, it says in Colossians 1:17, who is before all things and holds all things together. He quite literally makes things real. Like he is the one. He spoke things into being in order that they might live and move that have their being in him. And so it's the sense that, yes, it is real, but even more so, how gracious our God is that he would give us his word, and his word is to be a lamp to our feet and a guide to our path, but also give us something in the sense that he gave us instructions in order that we might be equipped to do every good work that he set out before us. And so, yes and amen, we need to be individuals that are proclaiming the gospel, and the gospel is kind of like one of those, it's the fun word right now, so we want to give gospel-centered gospels according to the gospel. And so, but even more than that, we want to expound upon the gospel implications. What does it look like for the gospel to impact my life in the business workplace? Because the gospel speaks more to my Sunday agenda, but also speaks to what happens on Monday, speaks to what happens on Tuesday. And that's where I think it requires us to do the necessary work as those that have been trained and equipped in the Word to be able to spell out those implications on the gatherings as well as just in the various forms that we can communicate.
Let's talk about the gatherings, fellowship. We're not to neglect the gathering together, but a little bit later we're going to talk about technology. Your generation sort of feels like I'm connected when I actually have a Facebook chat or a Snapchat or maybe even a Skype chat. But that's not the same thing as being face-to-face with other believers in church.
No, it's not. I mean, there's certainly a level of connection if we're texting with each other or emailing, right? That is a connection. But there's nothing like two human beings or three human beings sitting together in close proximity, looking into eyes and knowing that we are present with one another, right? And God calls us to come together to worship him corporately, because that sense of connection with God when we are together is unlike anything else. So no matter what we do, and it's all fantastic, right? We stream our services, we can connect in all these different ways, but at the end of the day, Christians, in whatever form it looks like, have to come physically together to worship God. It simply has to happen.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm reminded, just if we look at it from a holistic perspective, I think social media can be a good thing, but it can't be the only thing. It's a good secondary medium by which to continue to communicate. The primary has got to be the physical presence. So last night I had a friend that came in from Houston. He was attending Watermark Church, the porch service. And so they put on a conference. And so he asked me to come by after work and to be able to come to the porch gathering with him. And the porch is just doing great things right now. There are so many young adults that are coming on Tuesday nights. And so I was intimately acquainted with the fact that there were a lot of individuals in my personal space because the body heat. Like I was just as a guy that's a profuse sweater, which irony of all ironies, God will allow me to be born into a family named Pitts. So the profuse sweater would be born into the family of Pitts. I was just intimately acquainted with the fact that there is something different about physical presence. One primary characteristic being the body heat that surrounds people, among many other reasons. All of that to say, I think there's just something special that happens when people are physically gathered together. And we know some of the social science research effects that happens. We're less prone to say certain things when it's over the internet. We're more likely to sympathize with one another when we're face to face than when we're separated by a screen. Right. So there are a lot of other effects as well. So
we've talked about a little bit of the idea of authenticity and fellowship, which if you put the two together, that leads to a word called accountability. And first of all, remind us of the statistic on the number of millennials that actually trust someone else, because accountability is based upon some level of trust, of opening myself up enough for you to speak into my life.
Yeah, so only 19% of millennials would say that they trust someone else. So that there's just this 81% of millennials would say that they lack trust in what the Bible would say their neighbor.
Yes.
And so but the trust isn't just at the individual level, but we also see it at the institutional level as well. So there's a distrust of the church, registering, I think, at 55% of millennials distrust the church, relative to the government at 74%, relative to the military at 62%. There's just this systemic distrust among millennials, not only from the institutions, but also among one another.
Right?
Yeah, it makes me sad to hear that. What we know, and there's some really interesting new research out there in the realm of what's called emotionally focused therapy. And what we know, right, is that human beings connect with one another, make these emotional connections with one another when we're vulnerable with one another.
Very
right?
true.
And that's the most surefire way for you and I to connect. What has to be in place for people to be vulnerable with one another is a certain level of trust, right? I absolutely have to trust you at least at some level to begin to share a bit of who I am with you. And if I don't share who I am with you, right? If I don't trust you, like those connections, those bridges cannot be built. And so I don't know. I hear that. I didn't heard that stat, and it makes me sad as a pastor.
So what was so interesting, because when I read that, my mind immediately went to social media. And so on social media, my experience has often been that people overshare on that. I think we make fun of it by saying they're telling me their meals, they're telling me what everything that's doing, and sometimes they even reveal more than what I want to know. And so I thought, well, there's a certain level of trust with that. And I don't know if you're familiar, Andy Crouch's book, Strong and Weak.
He's been on here a couple times.
And so what he speaks to, I think, is just so key, is that individuals are willing to share a certain amount of information that gives individuals the impression that they're being very candid with them. But in reality, that's not candid details whatsoever. They're hiding the facts in order to project a facade that they're being genuine or being very vulnerable in that moment. But in reality, they're hiding so much of what's happening right now. So it's just a very interesting dynamic that we're beginning to enter into, where individuals, one, are willing to share and give the appearance that they're sharing and being vulnerable, but in reality, they're not sharing at all.
Yeah, because if it's a social media sharing, it's all curated. So before I post something, right, I have time to think about it, to decide, is this really what I want? Does it look how I want? But if I show up, like just at church on a Sunday morning, right? I mean, it's who I am.
It's spontaneous.
It's spontaneous.
Yeah,
and like
I can, vetted.
It's not vetted, and I can maybe dress a certain way or whatever. But again, when you feel a person's body heat, or you look into their eyes, or you watch the way they're sitting, or the way that they receive something, or the way they sing or don't sing, or whatever it is, you begin to see. And this is real vulnerability, right? For me just to be, and you're going to pick up on what you're going to pick up on, which is going to be the truth, whatever that is, right? That's coming out of me. And that's a different kind of vulnerability than what we put on the internet.
We're going to take a break and continue our conversation today. In studio with us, Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller. And if you'd like to know about either of them, we are going to spend a little bit of time later on talking about what's on their website, their blogs, and we're going to even read from some of the things they've written, so you'll have a chance to get to know them a little bit better. Of course, you've heard Nick Pitts over the last couple of months, and we're learning more about you getting educated than we ever thought we would ever know.
Teaching Nick was the Pitts.
We'll take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or sit back and listen. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Once again, Millennial Round Table, and we are privileged to have in studio with us today Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller. You can find out a little bit more about them, and before the hour is over, I want to spend a little bit of time going to their blogs and websites so that you know more. I know that Ryan has a new book coming out, so we want to talk about that. Nick, you were at Calvin College this week, and I know you're going to Washington, D.C., so we want to talk about that. So there are all sorts of things that we want to talk about, but let's, if we can, at least pick out one other thing that millennials wish the church would do. And the question was, is our church helping millennials find mentors? Ryan, that's a really big question, because a lot of people in the 20-something, 30-something age are saying, I'd like to learn a little bit more from some older, wiser men or women. And in Titus 2, it tells that older men should be discipling younger men. Older women should be discipling younger women. That's something we should structure inside the church, shouldn't we?
We have to. The church always has to be multi-generational and has to have in place older people whom younger people can look up to, can watch, can see how they're doing life. And we have to have the older generation be willing to do that. You know, for whatever reason, we've gotten to a place in our culture right now where it's just become easy to criticize or make fun of millennials. That's sort of like the go-to right now. You can make that joke and everybody will laugh, whatever. But I get a lot of this from Grant Skeldon, who's a great, millennial leader in town. Fantastic. We've been working together, and what he says is like, look, what we have to do is slow down here and become aware that this is actually like not okay just to like have millennials be punching bags. What millennials desperately need and are looking for and want are mentors. Other people say, okay, so the millennials say, okay, we get it. There are a lot of things we don't know, right? We haven't learned in the way that you want us to learn, but we want to. So will somebody maybe stop criticizing or just making fun of us and say, okay, well, look, you're right, you don't get it. Let me take the time to slow down. Let me welcome you into my life. Let me tell you about how I did it. Let me, mentor you. It really needs to happen.
It's one of the interesting things that social media and the internet's brought about. It's just that we are acutely aware of every single person's voice.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Today. And so that's
some voices don't need as much attention as they're being given.
So there are less gatekeepers than there ever have been. So I wouldn't say this generation has been picked on, but I just from cursory glances back at the past, I don't know if it's necessarily more than previous generations have been picked on, but we are very much aware of it because the internet has made a microphone of the vast criticism that has come our way. But what we do continue to see is just like in previous generations, like what Ryan was speaking to, is there is a great need for individuals to mentor one another, to disciple one another, for the church to be able to enter into that space that Jesus called us into, of being able to pass down these truths, to entrust these truths to faithful people. To be able to identify who is the Christian, what does it look like to be a Christian in engineering, and for the young engineer and the old engineer in the church to work together. What does it look like to be a Christian in the classroom, for the older teacher that's a Christian and the younger teacher to pair together, to be able to bring a distinctiveness of Christ to the classroom.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
That's right. And I think, again, just to go back to what Grant says, he says, look, mentoring has to, in the church, really be discipleship. Mm-hmm. So it's got to move beyond, hey, I'm going to take you to coffee once a month and catch up with you, to, look, I'm going to really actually welcome you into my life so you can see what it looks like to be the Christian engineer. I'm going to invite you into my home, not when we've got all of this prepared and we even know you're coming and we'll clean up everything and get the kids to be quiet and make a perfect dinner. You need to come in on a regular Thursday at 7:15 when it's total chaos and see what my life is actually like and build these real relationships. But that takes sacrifice and vulnerability, again, because a lot of times the older generations want to project to the younger people that they've got it all figured out and that everything is perfect and serene. And it's not, and that's okay.
Yes. The point you're making is one that was just made the other day by the pastor at Antigua Bible Church, and I know you've been there as well, because sometimes we learn things by osmosis. That's accidental. But really, Christian growth is intentional. And so, like you said, set a time, set a place, set a relationship, make it real, because what is happening is so far a lot of people, and I think this is true of every generation, but I see this in the millennial generation, I'm just going to pick it up by osmosis. I'm just going to pick it up by going to church. And just going to church and reading your Bible is good, but there's a whole lot more of an intentionality that needs to happen, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Completely agree. So I think that's why the biblical narrative 4 times is going to iterate to us that the righteous will live by faith. Faith is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Faith is a gift. It's nothing that we have. It's something that's given to us. Our righteousness is not of our own. It's Christ's righteousness and what he's imputed to us. But this living component, what does it look like to live? And I think that's where Ryan just has hit it right on the dot of us just figuring out, what does it look like to live into your world? Because it really, the craziness of life, it might not be the norm, but it is where you see what you value. And for millennials, I think it's going to be increasingly clear, especially in a social media world where we're used to setting up pictures in such a way to accentuate our best parts,
Yes.
that it's going to be increasingly important to give millennials a vantage point into what does it look like you value in the midst of conflict with your children? What does it look like to be able to have host a dinner? Right. And so I think that's one of the beautiful things that what can happen, especially because this is the church, what the church has always done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And see how you handle conflict, how you handle depression, how you handle difficulties. And that's really the authenticity part that you've been looking for, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why you see the gospel just go on fire right now within Asia right now.
Yes.
Specifically, you look at, there's statistics that say anywhere from a conservative numbers, 100,000 people are coming to faith in Christ in China alone right now. That there's upwards of 60 million believers in China right now. Well, it's largely done. Literally, you just have individuals that are learning one step ahead of the person that they're discipling. So they have someone that's discipling them and helping them understand the implications of John 4, and then they go teach their disciples that the next week. And so you're literally one step ahead, and it's this beautiful, chaotic mess that's happening, but you're seeing the gospel explode over there. It's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's what discipleship is. Sometimes you're just one step ahead of the person you're discipling. And we're going to have a couple of people here that have been involved with East-West Ministries and E3 Ministries, and you see all these churches being developed, and in some respects, they're just 1 week ahead of the people that they are discipling because they don't have all the big seminaries and everything like that, but that really works here in North America too, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, that's what Jesus said when he called the disciples, right? There were no prerequisites. He just said, follow me. And they did. They followed him, right? And so if I could say anything to the boomers who feel like, look, maybe they don't feel like their faith is big enough or mature enough. Like, I often hear people say, well, who am I to mentor or disciple someone younger? Look, if you are pursuing Jesus, right, authentically, right, if you're worshiping him in spirit and truth and you're trying, don't be afraid to let some other people come along after you. It's okay. Like, you're never going to get to a place where you're going to wake up and feel like, okay, I'm finally that mature enough Christian. Now I can start to disciple others. Like, no, like, it's going to be really messy. It's okay.
That's probably the point, that you don't need to disciple people.
Yeah,
if you think that you've got it together, that's probably, you probably need to step back.
Probably,
you look at Jesus and Peter in Mark 5. Peter gets close to Jesus fishing, and obviously Jesus is the best fisher ever. But when Peter gets close to Jesus fishing, he falls on his face like he's dead, because he recognizes that when you walk closely to the Father of all lights, you're going to get your stuff's going to be illuminated. Like, you're just your scars, just your imperfections. And that's the reality. The closer we walk with Jesus, the more acutely we are aware of our fallen selves. And that should only make room for the grace of God to be able just for us to rejoice in that and also to extend that.
Well, again, as we come to a break here, let me just mention, I think I've told this story once, but it's worth telling again because it's an action item. If you're listening right now and you are growing in your faith and you need to go find someone you can mentor, and a number of years ago, I was in a meeting at a Bible school right near here, and there is the chairman of the elder board, and we're talking about needing a mentor program, and at one point he said out loud, I don't think I really have anything to share with anyone else in the Christian life. And I looked at him and said, you are an executive in one of the largest organizations in the country here in Dallas. You are the chairman of our elder board, and if you have nothing to share, we're in a world of hurt here in this church. And I know it was his humility for just a minute, but I think everybody has that feeling. And so my action item is if you're growing in your faith, you need to find someone else that you can go and disciple, right? Isn't that the plan?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, that's a story that is a true story. I sat there and just rolled my eyes because I kind of understood his humility, but I also understood that if you cannot get the chairman of your elder board to see that he needs to be mentoring someone else in the church, we've got a lot of trouble.
And the beautiful thing about what's happening right now is millennials are the largest generation that are in existence right now. So it's not so much that I have to go look for someone. It's that they're already all around you. They're the largest voting populace right now. They're the largest age demographic in the workforce. And so it really is just looking around and finding that person that's already there.
Let's take a break, and we're going to talk about the Jesus secret. What in the world is that? I think you will find that fascinating. And as a matter of fact, maybe Christians should be the happiest people in the world. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 school boards in Arkansas were told to stop opening their meetings with prayer. Of course, the advice came not from their attorneys or the community the boards represent, but from a secularist group that just doesn't like prayer in public. We have covered the issue of legislative prayer often on the First Liberty Briefing. By now you know that public and legislative prayer has not only been a long-standing part of our country's history and tradition, it has at least twice been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And earlier in 2017, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit gave its approval to school boards opening meetings with prayer. Perhaps these school boards in Arkansas should consider the words of Chief Justice Berger writing for the majority in the 1983 case of Marsh versus Chambers. Quote, "It can hardly be thought that in the same week members of the First Congress voted to appoint and to pay a chaplain for each house and also voted to approve the draft of the First Amendment for submission to the states, that they intended the Establishment Clause of the amendment to forbid what they had just declared acceptable." Unquote. County commissions, city councils, and school boards across America, don't be afraid to pray like the members of the First Congress. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Our Millennial Round Table today, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller with us today. And Ryan, we have posted your article, actually a blog post on the Jesus secret, and you start out by saying if Christians aren't the happiest people in the world, then our religion probably isn't true. And you've got this idea of the Jesus secret, TJS. Talk a little bit more about what that's all about.
Sure. If you want to see Christians roll their eyes, tell them they should be the happiest people on the planet. I mean, I can't tell you, when I bring up this topic, the scorn that immediately comes out so often is just fascinating to me.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, but I believe it's true. And here's why. Jesus said he came to give us life and life in abundance.
Right.
If that doesn't include happiness, right, I don't know what does. So here's what I think. Look, oftentimes happiness is talked about at such a superficial level. We have an entire society, right, that seems to be obsessed with this idea of let me make you comfortable, let me help you do everything you can to sort of avoid any kind of suffering, whatever it is. Let's maximize your pleasure. And that's sort of like the extent of our conversation on happiness, which I think is ludicrous, right?
Yes.
If we can have life and life in abundance, here's the deal. Suffering is unavoidable, no matter what. If you haven't suffered yet in life, just wait, you will. We look around ourselves and there's suffering everywhere. This has always been the case, right, ever since sin entered the world and will be until Jesus Christ fully restores everything. So I don't say this lightly either about Christians being the happiest people, fully aware of what's happening in the Middle East right now. You've got Christians that are being persecuted in horrible ways, right? Children that are being martyred. So I don't say any of this flippantly. But what I do believe is that we are actually called to be happy. So here's the basic gist of the Jesus secret is that I think if people will take two principles very, very seriously in their lives, they will not necessarily be happy, but they will become happier. And here's what they are. The principle of authenticity and progression. So here's what I mean really quickly. We are called to be authentic, which is we are called to become who God created us to be, which is children of God, right? The Imago Dei is on each and every one of us. When God created us, he created us in God's image. This is whom we're called to be, is to discover who it is that we actually are. So we're called into this sense of authenticity. And the second is progression.
Progression, yeah.
Jesus Christ called us to follow him. And so often we get bogged down in this question of, oh man, have I become like Jesus? Have I become like Jesus? Wrong question. The question is, are you becoming like Jesus? What are you doing today in this moment to follow after him? So what happens in the Jesus secret is every day there's an entry. This will be turned into a book, and I've broken it up. You get a meditation, which is a prayer, a way to pray, an objective for the day, something you're actually going to try to accomplish, and then what I call a reflective action, which is a way to think about going about the objective. So as a pastor, I just find people need these sort of practical tools. So that's Jesus' secret in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. I'm reminded of a couple of things. One, you're just reminded of that from one degree of glory to the next that Paul speaks about in 2 Corinthians 3. Just this idea, it's not necessarily, I know I have a long way to go, but I'm just being transformed from one degree of glory to the next. Better
being
today.
transformed. It's in the present tense, so it's happening every day.
Yeah, so better today than yesterday, better tomorrow than today. And then reminder of C.S. Lewis, right? So C.S. Lewis says, don't judge a man by where he's at because you don't know how far he's come.
Yes.
It's that sense that we're just all a work in progress right now. And it really is just this reorientation. I mean, we think about the suffering component to it too, because it's so hard to fathom being happy in suffering. But Jesus has just radically redefined this happiness, right? So if we believe it to be true that the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man finds and goes and hides again, and for joy sells everything that he has in order to be able to go buy the field, we see that what once brought people pleasure, which was the possessions that he now sold, he has found something greater, which is that treasure. So now its suffering can be seen not necessarily as something that to rejoice in, but something that we recognize that Jesus is in. And because of that, the suffering presses me more into the treasure in the field. Like happiness isn't that which brings me satisfaction. Happiness now is that which brings me closer to God. And so it's just this radical redefinition.
You know, when we had Randy Alcorn on in his new book on happiness, he points out something which, again, might help people stop rolling their eyes, because if you look at the Beatitudes, it says blessed. Well, really, that could just as easily be translated happy. And you look at all of the verses that he takes you through. Again, every one of his books is about 300 to 400 pages. He never writes a short book, you know. He just takes you through all these different aspects of happiness. And if you think about this, this, Ryan, happiness isn't related to materialism. Some of the places where I've seen the greatest amount of happiness have been in third world countries. It isn't necessarily always related to even great relationships, although that is certainly a component of that. Happiness and joy and those kinds of things are something that we as Christians should manifest. And when you see so many Christians dour and glum and defeated and discouraged, you have to maybe wonder, maybe that's why our witness in the world isn't working very well, because people are saying, well, your life doesn't look any different than mine, so why would I want to go to your church? Why would I want to know about your Savior? Because it doesn't seem to be working for you.
That's right. And that's the Jesus secret. The secret is that when Jesus ascended back to heaven, right, he promised to send a helper.
Yes.
For his presence to be here. And this is the secret that Christians know, is that we can have Christ present in everything that we do. And because Jesus doesn't send his presence to take away our suffering, to explain our suffering, but to fill it with his presence, that is why we ought to be the happiest people in the world, and why we actually can be the happiest people in the world, regardless of what material possessions we have, whatever our health is, our circumstances. I'm not saying any of this is going to be easy or necessarily even pleasant, but there's nothing that satisfies a human like the presence of Jesus Christ.
So even if we look at this from a sociological perspective and take Jesus out of this, what Arthur Brooks has found in his happiness hypothesis is he finds that there are 4 characteristics that can qualify an individual for happiness. And he looked over 2,300 sociological studies, so very significant social science research. He said there are 4 components for an individual to be able to attain happiness. One is to being able to have a framework and a worldview of the world. How do you make sense of the suffering that you kind of go through? How do you make sense of the joy that you go through? So have a worldview. 1. 2, have a family. Have a sense of families often bring stability and prosperity. They help buoy us. 3, have a sense of friendship, right? So we have individuals outside of family that outside of their bloodlines, they don't have to love us. So you've got a sense of family or community camaraderie. 3. And then the 4th component is a sense of vocation, having something to put your hand to the plow, a sense of working that one might say makes the time fly by because you're having so much fun, right? So whatever you do, I never worked a day in my life because I've always loved what I do since. So he says that when those 4 things are present, it has an ability to set us toward a trajectory of happiness, and very much touches on that, especially from outside of even the Jesus perspective.
Yes, well, again, back to the point, how the gospel answers that question. You can also see why people outside of Christianity, if they have those components, do. That's what we call common grace. But the answer to that question really is to find Jesus, and that's the Jesus secret, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Are you ready to buy this book? I'm ready to buy this book.
I'm there.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
there right
we'll
now.
get you back as soon as it comes out here. And
Fantastic.
Nick and I and everybody else will go interview you. But if you'd like to know a little bit more, we do have a link to his website. It is RyanCaseyWaller.com. But the good news is just click next to his picture. It will take you right there. And boy, when that book comes out, we're going to put it on there and we'll do an interview. Don't you think it'll be a good interview?
I feel good about that. I feel really good about it.
Yeah, you're happy about it, aren't you?
I'm real happy.
Fantastic.
If I'm happy about I know it, clap my hands. I want you to know I'm clapping my hands right now.
That's
there
very
it is.
good. We're going to take a break. We'll talk a little bit more about millennials and technology and some of these issues, how millennials have been looking at that. That comes up in the second hour, right after these important messages.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and it is our Millennial Round Table. We have in studio with us Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller, and if you're just joining us, we'll introduce them again in just a few minutes as we talk about some of the very important information that is on both of their websites. But one of those articles we've posted is one that Nick Pitts has written, and we'd actually had it on the website. We brought it back again. Just Google it. What we are doing with technology, but more importantly, what technology is doing to us. And you can't talk about the millennial generation, those born between 1980 and 2000, without talking about how the technology has been so formative in those young years and are certainly influencing the millennial generation even to this day.
Yeah, I think it's just, again, I just am so fascinated by how technology, one, the positive benefits. It's creating efficiencies in the marketplace. It's being able to bridge together people that are once disparate and once very far away have been brought near because of technology, such as things like FaceTime and because of Skype, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also some detrimental effects to technology, everything from just the sheer amount of screen time. We're looking at a screen upwards of 10 hours a day now, to the sense that there's sociological effects, the phantom effect, where you feel like your phone is vibrating, but it's not really vibrating, to the you being a dead walker, someone that's walking with their phone, and so just oblivious to their whole surroundings, myself included. And so it's just fascinating what's doing to us today.
One of the things you talk about there is, according to CrowdTap, millennials spend an average of 17 hours a day, which might even be low, but just think about, Ryan, just the displacement. If I'm spending almost 18 hours a day with social media, that tells me I'm not spending it in meaningful relationships, which we talked about in the first hour. It means I probably am not spending it in the Bible, even though almost all of us have Bibles on our phone. There's got to be some problems just with that before we even get into all the dark back alleys of the internet, right?
Oh, yeah. Even if what you're doing with your phone or your tablet or computer, let's say it's all positive, right? Let's say that all those 17 hours or whatever are productive. Maybe you're making connections. Maybe you're creating great content. Still, whenever we have some piece of technology between two human beings, right, there's a barrier there. We all know what it's like to be talking to someone and to have them check it, right? Or you're having a meal and it buzzes, and they even if they don't respond, but they take it and check it and put it down. It's just bizarre, and it's just a thing, right? Yeah.
So Regent University just came out with a study that showed how, like, even just the sense of having a cell phone on a table has the ability to inhibit it, to cause a disruption within a connection. And so just even the presence of a cell phone, like, I'm just very cognizant, especially when I'm out at dinner, to not even bring my cell phone like onto the table, because I know it just, again, it shows that that's of secondary importance to the connection that I'm trying to have with someone while I'm breaking of bread, right? And so it's the sense that I want to be fully present. And sometimes technology used to be the thing that connected us with individuals, now is the thing that disconnects us with individuals, according to Sherry Turkle's work.
Yes. Well, and if you go to Chick-fil-A, they have a little box you can set them in. Yeah. And that's just a way. And I saw that, and then I learned it the other night, because we're going to have some people on here talking about technology and sexting and pornography and all that kind of stuff. And I did not know that for sure. But there's a good example. And really, that's, I think, Ryan, something we need to address from the church. And we've had a couple of individuals on here that have done some blogs about how to begin to think about this technology, because it can be all-consuming, can it, for some individuals?
It can be all-consuming. And you said earlier that Christian growth must be intentional.
Right.
We've got to become intentional about our technology uses and view this as a spiritual issue, because it is. I'll give you an example. I came home a couple of months ago. I have 2 little boys. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And the 2-year-old was playing at my feet doing something, and I was doing like a lot of us do. I came into the house, the workday was over, but I wasn't letting the workday over. I felt my phone buzzing, so I kept responding and writing things. Meanwhile, my child is playing at my feet, trying to get my attention, and my wife said, "You really do love that phone, don't you?" And I looked up, and she's kind. She's, be cutting, but she was making a point, and I thought, what am I doing?
Yes.
This child will be 2 years old at my feet for a second and gone. I couldn't tell you in this moment what message I was replying to, but apparently in that moment I thought it was really important. No, it wasn't. What we've got to do is talk to people about the decisions they're making with their technology, about what does it mean to view this as a spiritual issue, that when you pull into the garage and you come inside and it's time for family, that you either turn that phone off or you take it and you put it somewhere, right? Or you just think about this. We think about boundaries in all other areas of our lives, right? In terms of Christian ethic, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, how we're going to do it. But for whatever reason, we have just let technology just run over us and become this all-consuming thing. And as you say, there are all these benefits, obviously, to technology, but, come on. It's creating havoc.
It was so fascinating. Even just last week, Amazon came out, and so I don't know if anyone has an Amazon Echo or Amazon Tap in their house, and it's just this device that you can play music on, you can have it read the news to you, and so now there's a function that's coming out where you can put a camera on top of it, and it can judge your outfit that you're wearing now. So there's even technology now that's coming out mainstream that is going to allow you, I think it's for $100 or $200, put a camera on top of the Echo that's going to be able to judge your outfit, to either give you affirmation or maybe you should give a second thought to what you're wearing, which is, again, just fascinating how technology is moving into this. And I think Ryan touched on it. Like we see in the very genesis of God, we see him creating these boundaries. He creates boundaries for the sea, for the sea and the water, for the sky and the earth. And there's these boundaries that are put into place in the very beginning, and how it's important for us to establish these boundaries as well. Because, again, we're not trying to say technology is bad. Technology is a really good thing. But anything that becomes all-consuming, you fail to heed Paul's admonition of becoming enslaved, even though Christ has set you free to be free. And so that's just very detrimental, because as Ryan has shared, and I can attest, you just become so consumed in that thing just becomes a master of you.
Yeah.
Well, again, you have to have boundaries. If indeed your statistics tell us that the average millennial checks his or her phone 150 times.
And I want to say that's low. Kerby, I get to morning. I think about I
have no trouble believing 150.
Yeah, I think that's a low ball number. I think about that. I just think about even. So here's the alarming statistic. Everyone said, I know, I'm going to worry everybody right now. And so I think about on your phone, right? On your phone while you're driving right now. A study just came out last week that said 88% of individuals use their phone while they're driving. Of that 88% that use their phones while they're driving, they use their phones 3.5 minutes every hour. So can you imagine 3.5 minutes every hour, 88% of the people that are driving? It's just, that's just astronomical amount of time when you need to be fully cognizant of your surroundings. It's so fascinating.
Did you know that in the past 2 years, we've seen a spike in road fatalities that's been higher than anything we've seen in the past 50 years? Now think about this, right? Technology has made driving should be as safe as it's ever been, right? The cars will brake for us, they'll park for us, all of this. More people are dying. Why? Distracted driving. Yes. This is it. It's unbelievable. These are preventable deaths. Preventable deaths.
Worse than DWI, really, basically. And that's just incredible. Well, we've got more to cover, but I suspect this technology conversation is one you'd like to join. So if you'd like to, 1-800-351-1212. We have a lot more to cover, and we have a number of issues in the news, and love to get a millennial perspective. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, tax day this year landed on April 18th, but I took the time to remind my listeners that the more important day was April 23rd. That is Tax Freedom Day. According to the Tax Foundation, that is the day when the average American has paid off all of his or her taxes, federal, state, and local. Of course, this varies by state to state. Tax Freedom Day for people in Mississippi lands on April 5th, but it doesn't come until May 21st for people living in Connecticut. You know, there's another day that is important. That is the Cost of Government Day that not only counts all the taxes, but the cost of mandatory federal, state, and local regulations. Now, it turns out that last year, the Cost of Government Day did not arrive until July 6th. In other words, you spend more than half of the year, 186 days, to pay what the government demands in taxes and regulations. President Trump and Congress are working to reform the tax code, which reads like a foreign language to most Americans. How complex is the tax code? In his book, A Fine Mess, T.R. Reid provides this example. Enter 6% of the smaller of line 40, or the value of your Archer MSAs on December 31st, 2015, including the 2015 contributions made in 2016. Include this amount on Form 1040, line 58A, or Form 1040 NR, line 56B. How many pages in the tax code? Some say that it is 70,000 pages long, but that is the actual standard federal tax reporter, which also includes the legislative history. The actual tax code by itself is about 2,600 pages, but either number is overwhelming and perhaps the best argument for why we need to reform the tax code. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to those in just a minute. Let me just mention, though, as we have a second before we take our first phone call, there are some ways you can connect up with our guests. And first of all, we've been talking about this article, What Technology is Doing to Us. That's the short version of a longer one. What we are doing with technology, what technology is doing for us. That's just one of many articles we have on the website, pointofview.net. But they also can go to the DenisonForum.org, and they can get the daily briefing. They can get all the things that Jim Denison says. So talk about if people want to read this in its entirety or pass it on to their kids and say, this is why I'm not letting you use a smartphone at the dinner table or whatever. Yeah. Where can they find some of that?
Yeah, so Denison Forum, DENISON Forum.org. You can find primarily our two kind of publications that we put out. One would be Jim Denison's daily article, which is around 500 to 550 words, that takes a topic of the day and tries to help you think about it from a biblical perspective. Just a very thoughtful, considered essay. And then there is mine, which is the daily briefing, which is anywhere from 9 to 14 articles, which I really just try to give you
9 pages every day. 9 pages.
So
just 9 pages.
Yeah, so just try to give you a better understanding of of what's happening in the world today. What are people talking about around the water coolers, and then how am I to think about this from a biblical perspective?
And I might just mention this particular article is also listed on the relevantminute.com. And we haven't done as much to talk about this, but this is a millennial friendly one where it's shorter. It has some videos that you and Allie Beth have done at some of your articles. Speaking of articles, also the May issue of the Outlook is on the whole issue of freedom of conscience. That's by Dr. Nick Pitts. So we've got all sorts of great material there as well. So lots of ways you can connect up with him. Of course, he's been on the program before, but a lot of people getting a chance to meet Reverend Ryan Waller. And again, we have a link to RyanCaseyWaller.com. That's your blog. But talk about some of the resources that are there, and also tell us a little bit more about the book coming out in the fall.
Yeah. So you can check out my website. I'm also pretty active on Facebook. That's where I write the most. But yeah, I have my first book coming out in the fall of this coming year with Forward Movement Press. It's entitled Broken, and it's 30 different spiritual essays that explore a theme of vulnerability. So the basic thrust of the book is that all of us are broken in some real fundamental way. But the good news is that Jesus blessed the bread before he broke it. So what running even deeper than our brokenness is this image of God that's been implanted in each one of us and what God is calling us to. And so through the 30 essays, it's typical sort of Christian inspiration work where there's a passage of Scripture, and then each essay explores that in a very narrative sense. Hopefully people will find the hope of the gospel through these stories that I tell and how I explore Scripture. So again, it's entitled Broken. It'll be out in September, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, we'll have you on to talk about that.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, very much so. It's very fascinating.
Let's take some phone calls. We'll head first to the state of Kentucky. And Susie, I think you want to talk about technology. That's the topic at the moment. So what would you like to add to our conversation? Susie, are you there? Well, I guess let me try one more time. Susie?
Yes, I am. Should I turn the radio down?
That would certainly help us. That's probably why you were getting an echo there. We do have a delay.
Okay,
that's
can you hear
some
me
people
now?
say some naughty things, so that's why we have the 10-second delay. I can hear you. Go for it.
Well,
yeah, turn it down.
I'm sorry. Yes, I wanted to talk about the impact of the environment that I think the cell towers and much of your computers, laptops that we're using in this day and age have an effect on our planet, our wildlife, our nature of trees, plants, and so forth, along with the devastation of flooding, fires, and effects that we have across the United States that have come about from that.
Well, again, I hadn't even thought about that, but every time you turn around, you see if another cell tower going up because everybody's using a cell phone. So, yes, and of course, we've talked about some of the wind turbines and how it's attacking the birds and all the other things. So that's another aspect of technology I never even thought about.
Yeah, you don't even think about some of the unintended consequences of individuals continually innovating, one. So innovating into spaces where you're disturbing, I guess you could say, the equilibrium of these ecosystems. And then two, what we're seeing is that, again, they're bringing into light, I guess you could say in a positive manner, some of these places whereby you really were only able to see it or kind of somewhat experience it if you actually went there. And so it's creating these shorter distances. But you bring up a very great point.
The medical aspect of that, too, because you have the EMF, the electromagnetic flux. Now, that affects my wife, interestingly enough. You come into her home, it looks like a 1950s home. We don't have a cell phone. I have one, but she does not have one. We don't even have a cordless phone. We have a corded phone, okay?
Wow.
And we had to get a special kind of TV that had none of that kind of flux and all those kinds of things. But I thought about that in terms of children because, young children can be affected by that. And the other day, interestingly enough, this was, I thought, very interesting. Bill Gates was asked in an interview, at what age would you allow your child, since he knows a lot about technology, at what age would you allow your child to have a smartphone or a cell phone? He said age 14.
Wow.
Now, that was striking because, I'm looking at Ryan's experience. You've got some kids that probably don't have a cell phone right now.
No,
but just think about waiting another 10 years before they have a cell phone.
Oh, it wouldn't happen. And they grab it out of my hands. You can watch the 2-year-old will take it. The iPad knows how to unlock it. They just watch and they see these things and they want it. That terrifies me. And I would be,
But that's what, if nothing else, Bill Gates said.
Yeah, that's
now, whether that's right or wrong, that's what he said.
That's interesting.
Isn't that interesting? Steven Spielberg one time was talking about he didn't let his kids watch his movies, and you're like, what? Well, because I know how scary they could be. And all of a sudden we're saying, okay, maybe parenting requires a little bit more intervention than we've necessarily had.
Yeah, so even thinking about technology, one of the things that I think is so interesting was a study that came out of Japan where they saw that, so there's just this massive influx influx of wanting to flood our classrooms with technology. Well, what they're seeing in the early stages, so K through 3 in the Japanese system, is that technology really wasn't helping the cognitive levels of these individuals. That it was just it was a secondary form of educational resource, but it wasn't really helping the cognitive skills that were necessary, especially in those younger minds.
And when you start thinking about something you and I've talked about before, the shallows, for example, what the internet is doing to our brains, that's just one of many books that have said, it's shortening the concentration time. And so, Ryan, you're just sitting here saying, okay, I'm a pastor and I'm preaching, and I've got an audience here that's used to thinking in 140 characters, and I'm supposed to communicate something significant, some of the deep theological truths of the Scripture in 140 characters? That doesn't seem possible.
Now, I mean, and of course, it's difficult. Yeah, my biggest concern, I think, as a pastor, and the way that thinking about technology, is that we have such few moments, as it already is, for sacred space, if you will, right, in our lives, where we just quiet down and we're disconnected, and we have an extended period of prayer or silence, worship, whatever it is.
Or just even quiet, just solitude.
It's so hard to find. But here's the thing: we still, if somebody's doing their job right in a pulpit, you can find people will sit still, right, and they will listen. They will sort of blow all the sort of research that's out of the waters that's coming out that we won't do this anymore. We still can. We have this capability. But I worry about where we're going to be in another 50 years or so of doing this, right? If folks can't sit down and at least for 20, 30 minutes, whatever it is, just actually be a listener of something, right? We're sort of losing this art. I mean, you see it in education even. Professors have moved away from their sort of, the route to be a professor is to what? To profess, right? To stand up and just lecture, right? And so how often do you even find professors that will do this? They feel like they have to incorporate tons and tons of technology. We have to have visuals. We know all this can help at certain times, but we're losing the ability, I think, slowly, right, to just sit for extended periods of time and actively listen to another human being speak.
Wow.
And I think that could have significant consequences in the future. So something to think about, again, to be intentional about.
Yeah, this. Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. Probably a better way to translate it, be chill out and know that I am God. And nobody is really doing that. And the idea of meditating on Scripture and meditating on the profound thoughts of what is there. I forgot to mention earlier that you studied under Dallas Willard at USC. What an outstanding individual. But again, just think about some of the great theological lessons that can't be taught in a Twitter tweet, just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, so again, you just look to the life of Jesus, and more often than not, especially in the Gospel of Mark, which you continue to see, and he retreated again, and he retreated again. Jesus was Jesus was prone to get away and just be alone with himself, but also with the Father in heaven, in order that he might understand what it is that the Father would have for him, so that he could glorify the Father while here on earth.
Well, we've been talking about technology. When we come back, we want to take maybe a few issues out of the daily briefing. One that has been a kind of a technological phenomenon, the statement by Jimmy Kimmel about his son and how that seems to be affecting healthcare policy and a variety of other issues. So we have a lot to cover, as we always do, and we will do that. Again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221, or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour is our Millennial Round Table, and we're privileged to have in studio with us today Nick Pitts and Ryan Waller, and we'll take a phone call before we get into some other issues. Caleb in Texas, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I wanted to say that the whole millennials looking at their phones, it's kind of, y'all are right. Y'all are not wrong at all. There have been plenty of times where I've taken a girl out on a date, and she's just second nature, just looks at her phone.
Looking at the phone more than looking at you, and that makes you feel like you're a second-class citizen, doesn't it?
I mean, it's not kind of yes, sir, but I mean, I'm a millennial. I'm born in '95, but it's just, I mean, I know
second nature.
Yeah. It's just, it just became a habit, and I mean, you can see it among families at dinners, or well, I love this here. A couple of years ago, I went to a passion conference, and Francis Chan spoke about don't lose the wonder, how we're all tied up in technology. And like he would talk about, you know, how many of us pulled our phones out in the middle of that conference instead of just taking everything and absorbing it all in.
That's right. Yeah, we need to get Francis Chan on here and have him as part of the roundtable of speaking to some of those issues. You know, that's interesting because he talks about, you know, around the table, everybody has their phone. You go to restaurants, and I've seen this, and we did a survey a while back. Matter of fact, some of that survey is in the Tom Rayner survey of millennials, in which they ask, when you're not in the presence of some individual, how do you communicate with them? Of course, number one was text and then email, all the rest. I think we should go back and answer the question, even when you're in the presence of someone, how do you communicate with them? Because I've actually seen individuals sending text across the table with each other.
Yeah.
That's just nuts. Ryan, speak to that.
Well, what worries me is that we lose, and I love that line that the caller mentioned, you know, don't lose the wonder.
Yes.
These pregnant moments that happen between individuals when we're interacting with one another. If we always just sort of retreat, so there's like a lull in the conversation, so maybe I don't actually pull the phone, but I just hit the screen so it lights up, so I see if there's a message, versus just lingering, what's going to happen, or maybe the other person goes to the restroom, instead of just looking around the restaurant and observing and just being present, maybe enjoying whatever I'm eating or drinking, I go to the phone, and the thing is, you'll never know what you're missing. You're missing something, but you will never know what it is.
That's true.
Right?
So professors can definitely speak to this. I've had many friends that have said that there used to be a day 10, 15 years ago that they would walk into their class upon giving a lecture, and it would be bustling, and there would be so much activity because individuals would be talking to one another.
Yes.
And now we're in a way that they walk into classrooms and there's a dead silence because everyone's on their phone, everyone's consumed with the connection of somebody on the outside.
Wow.
And it's just very unfortunate, I would say. And I mean, we'll even bring this to the table of what Caleb was talking about. One of the things that my friends we've decided to institute in our lives is everyone puts their phone into the center of the table, and whoever picks up their phone during dinner has to pick up the bill
I've heard that
as well.
Yeah.
So there's the sense that we want to be very present in the moment. But it's just fascinating because 37% of millennials would say that there's no problem in texting while you're eating at a meal. And so there's just, I think you do miss it. And I think if we even pivot even further from that, I think one of the things that has definitely taken off is these sense of viral moments that you're just you're catching some candid moment from individuals that, one, we can either laugh at, or two, we can either just be appalled by. And one of the things that I'm always very cognizant of, especially when someone's getting hurt or when somebody's the laughing of a joke, what keeps an individual from just staying behind their phone instead of helping that individual.
Mm-hmm. That always has been something that goes through my mind. The fact that I'm watching it's very interesting, but I'm thinking, why don't I see you running to go help that person or to stop that fight or whatever it might be? I don't know. Again, that's maybe my age. But I'm
crosses
my mind all the time.
I'm befuddled by there's just that sense of security, but also that sense of future glory that comes knowing that the video that I'm going to be posting right now is going to go viral. And it's not so much I want my 15 minutes of fame as much as I want my 15 million hits of fame, right? And so I think it's just interesting how the human experience is changing because of technology.
There's no greater gift, I don't think, that you can give a person beyond your presence.
Yeah.
To look at them to say, I'm here with you. Right? I could be anywhere in the world, I could be doing anything, but I'm actually here with you, not just in body, but my mind and my spirit. I'm present with you.
Well said.
Yeah. I'm reminded of the line from The Office. So Michael and Michael Scott and Dwight. Michael tells Dwight, like, I want your undivided attention, and then Dwight just rejoins and he says, "You can't handle my undivided attention."
We'll give it a try here.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's, if we can, talk about one of the more profound technology moments of the last few days, and that was the statement by late night TV comedian Jimmy Kimmel, who got very serious all of a sudden and gave a very emotional monologue about his newborn son. And again, very powerful because if nothing else, anybody that has walked in Jimmy Kimmel's shoes, and I'm even reading one from Michelle Malkin because her daughter's had some real challenges as well, can have the emotional tug. But now, if I can read Nick Pitts, it seems like some people are now thinking that because of this monologue, which was viewed by 14 million views, not necessarily that, and 230,000 reactions in less than 24 hours, that might be enough to kill off the repeal and replace health care bill right now in Congress.
Yeah, so it's just fascinating because, again, Jimmy Kimmel, like, this video has just gone viral even more than normal for a Kimmel video. Like, what you saw is, like, I think he averaged about 1 million views, I think was correct, on his YouTube videos, and got 14 million. Well, he's just recounting this past week of where his child was born, and within hours they had to have open heart surgery upon the child, and now the child is healthy. And then he moves and shifts into gratitude for individuals and doctors, and then moves towards a political posture of saying that this is another reason why we need to have the Affordable Care Act and why we don't need to repeal and replace this. I think from a Christian perspective, one of the things that we first want to acknowledge is to create space that just has that sense of sorrow and that sense of grieving, that sense of this isn't right, but to rejoice and to be thankful in all times that this child now is experiencing the fullness of life. But what Kimmel does, and I think opens him up to fair play, is he inserts politics into this moment. So, yes and amen, as a Christian, we want to acknowledge and give him space for that. But since he brought up the conversation, then I think it's important for us to be able to engage the conversation as well, which, again, I think is just, I have my scruples with the ACA, and I think I disagree with some of the aspects that he brought up.
Well, and again, one of the things that Michelle Malkin pointed out, which I thought was very good, in the past, if you had some kind of health issue, I can think of, for example, when David Letterman went in for heart surgery, he went back and he praised the doctors. And as she said here, he could have used this to champion the nation's best and brightest pediatric specialists and medical innovators, could have used this to educate the public about coping with rare diseases. But instead, that's where you, again, maybe now in this more millennial-friendly, everything has to be political environment, I want to get your comments about this. He's saying, well, if you were born with a congenital heart disease like my son, there was a good chance you'd never be able to get health insurance. That's not true. He went on to say that if your parents didn't have medical insurance, you might not live long enough because you'd be denied because of a pre-existing condition. Well, that's not true. And so as a result, first of all, he's fortunate that he was at Cedars-Sinai and Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. That's the first thing. But there's a political element of that. And on the one hand, you don't want to say too much about the political because haven't we described that for millennials, emotions trump logic sometimes? And this emotional experience, I mean, I'd be like a hard-hearted person if I were to say that shortly after somebody watches a video. They think I'd had absolutely no scruples, no heart, and would be somebody that should be banished to outer darkness. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, it's going to be increasingly important. One, he's the one that brought up the conversation, so I think it's important for us to respond to the conversation. But two, so being having a conservative bent, liberals don't have the monopoly on feelings and emotions. And I think that's been one of the neat things that's come out. So the Michelle Malkin, Matt Lewis has a piece in the Daily Beast, as well as Ben Shapiro was speaking about it today. They haven't put that kind of emotional story behind it, but each of us they appear to have a story that has very significant weight and feeling, but they've come at it from a different side. And so I think it's going to be increasingly important moving the football down the field to be able to show, well, we have feelings too, but we also have the facts to be able to back it up.
Any comments?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think healthcare is incredibly complicated, and I'll leave it to you guys. But you know, as a parent, in his defense, right, there'd be nothing scarier. There is nothing scarier in life than to have your own child,
a heart murmur, and the fact that he could die.
Yeah, and so
I understand that.
You know, I haven't got to see this whole video. I've seen a little clip of it. But I would imagine that recounting that story too,
so powerful.
Whatever you say in that moment, I mean, you're just, you talk about a moment in which you're going to wear everything on your sleeve. That's clearly what he did. But healthcare is complicated. I'll let you guys handle the politics of that.
I just want to bring it up because, again, sometimes it illustrates, again, the emotion trumps any kind of logic or discussion, you know. poor Tom Price there, Director of Health and Human Services, to try to put up charts to even begin to explain that. You lose every time. We'll take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 school boards in Arkansas were told to stop opening their meetings with prayer. Of course, the advice came not from their attorneys or the community the boards represent, but from a secularist group that just doesn't like prayer in public. We have covered the issue of legislative prayer often on the First Liberty Briefing. By now you know that public and legislative prayer has not only been a long-standing part of our country's history and tradition, the Supreme Court of the United States. And earlier in 2017, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit gave its approval to school boards opening meetings with prayer. Perhaps these school boards in Arkansas should consider the words of Chief Justice Berger writing for the majority in the 1983 case of Marsh versus Chambers. Quote, "It can hardly be thought that in the same week members of the First Congress voted to appoint and to pay a chaplain for each house and also voted to approve the draft of the First Amendment for submission to the states, that they intended the Establishment Clause of the amendment to forbid what they had just declared acceptable." Unquote. County commissions, city councils, and school boards across America, don't be afraid to pray like the members of the First Congress. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, and let me just mention again that today in the daily briefing, one of those, of course, you mentioned the whole discussion that has developed as a result of Jimmy Kimmel, but I thought I would get into one other one that a lot of the talk shows are talking about, and that is Adam Jones. And this is an individual that plays for the Baltimore Orioles, and he said that indeed, when he was at Fenway Park in Boston, that he heard racial taunts. And so a lot of people said, well, that might have just been a one-off. And then you started having some other individuals, C.C. Sabathia and some others, saying, no, the only place I've ever heard the N-word has been in places like Boston. That's led the mayor and others say, this is not us, this is not our people. The president of Red Sox have said this. But this is, in the 21st century, still hard for me to believe. And so what are your thoughts? Because, Nick, you wrote about this, and again, people can read it in your daily briefing, and it's just something that people have started talking about again.
Yeah, so it's just an unfortunate part of the fall. It's just a tragic part of the fall that we're seeing, just this racism which seeks to degrade individuals based upon the color of their skin. And not judge individuals based on the content of their character, as King would say.
Yes.
And so I think what we continue to see, especially as we move further and further away from the Jim Crow laws of a previous generation, of a previous era, rather, is that there are two different types of racism. It's the individual level of what's being accused here, of taunts through the words that we say, but there's also the systemic level as well, which sometimes can be a little bit more disguised and a part of the fabric. And what's so unfortunate is that there have been many over the years that have continued to contend that systemic racism is just a part of the reality of the American system right now. But many have said that maybe individual is what we've been fighting against. Well, now what's been brought to life with what's happening in Boston right now is that that's just not the case. There are still levels of individuals racism that's still plaguing our system.
And I don't want to overplay it because, just two college kids that have been imbibing adult beverages could be the only reason for that. And some people said they didn't really believe it happened. And there's a big joke about, well, it probably did happen because not only did he throw racial taunts, but he threw out a bag of peanuts. And given the fact that peanuts these days cost you $7 when you go to a ball game, it sounded pretty real. So if nothing else, we're talking about maybe an isolated incident, but it just illustrates again that just about the time we hope to be in a post-racial society, we still have some of these problems.
We're not. That's right. It's unbelievable to think that these sorts of things still happen, and the reality is they happen, and they happen all the time. I run into it and see it constantly, and I'm a white male middle class guy. And I can pick up on it, and it's a shame. It's got no place, and especially as Christians, we ought to be leading and doing everything that we can to stamp out racism.
I think that's one of the things that's so fascinating that you bring up is that so King would say that we have the 11 o'clock problem. At 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most divided time in America, segregated time in America. And so there was a book out, Divided by Faith or Divided by Race by Emerson, that came out of Oxford Press. And some of the research that they showed is that so a homogeneous congregation is a congregation that has 90% of one ethnicity in it. That there are 83% of churches here in the U.S. that they would consider to be homogeneous. And so when you think about that, and then think about what the I don't want to say but what the kingdom looks like relative to this idea of displaying for the principalities and powers of this world the manifold, the varied wisdom of God, of individuals from every nation, tribe, and tongue coming together to be able to worship the Lord on Sundays and Mondays together, and just to see just how monolithic and homogeneous the churches are. I just think we're missing an opportunity, I guess you could say.
That's really well put. I mean, and the reality is, for many churches, they're going to sort of look the same because the reality is we all have different cultures, different neighborhoods, people are going to gravitate. But you say it just right. When we're completely the same, what we miss is the opportunity, right, to hear from one another, especially as Christians, right? Christianity, all of Christendom is so rich with variety. And if have only ever stayed in the same spot with people who've been brought up like you, people who look like you, people who worship like you, you're just missing out on the richness, right, of another variety. And it's sad.
I'm just trying to think of some action items. One would be Movement Day. You've been involved with that. Grant Skelton, I think you have as well. So again, we have a number of people that have been involved in one in Dallas, one in New York, and they want to, in a sense, franchise this. So this could be something that communities bring together people from north and south, east and west, black and white, Hispanic. That would be, I think, a very positive action item for any listener today, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. And, guys like Jeff Warren at Park Cities Baptist Church and the pastor of Concord Bible Church, whose name is eluding me right now, is an historically African-American church, and Park Cities Baptist Church, more historically white church, have been meeting and doing things together ever since the shooting, and really trying to just not talk about this, but put it into action. They've led a group of pastors that are meeting regularly. Yeah, I'm sure.
So Brian Carter.
Brian Carter.
Concord. So
that's what I thought you were thinking.
Yeah, and so it's this. And one of the things I think, just an action item that an individual listener can do is just begin to. We live in a very integrated society now. Praise God. And so developing those relationships and being intentional to be able to develop these relationships. So whereby, one, you can just begin to understand a different experience and just to heed the biblical command to be quick to listen and slow to speak. And so begin to have those conversations, one, and then to begin to try to figure out, What does it look like for me to make my own particular change in this? What is my role in this? And so maybe it's becoming an ally for an individual in a particular system or society, or maybe it's just trying to become aware of the situation. It's just a very delicate situation that's very hard to talk about. And so it's increasingly more important for us to build those bridges and conversations and relationships, because inevitably grace is going to be needed to be extended.
Right. So again, if people would like to interact with you, first of all, as I go to Ryan Waller, we have next to his picture there a link to the Twitter account, and then you can also find him on the Facebook account. And we will, of course, again, just Twitter is just Ryan Casey Waller, and of course the website is ryancaseywaller.com. So you probably can find it pretty easy there. Got a book coming out on Broken, so be watching for that, and we'll certainly cover that here in the program. And Nick Pitts, of course, we've got the Denison Forum on Truth and Culture. We have your link, both the Twitter account and the Facebook account. And today we've been quoting from the Daily Briefing, and we post some of those under the Viewpoints commentary. So each day my Viewpoints commentary comes out, and then on Wednesdays you're at least a link to the Daily Briefing, but people can sign up to receive this, right?
Yeah. So you can sign up at Denison Forum, DENISON forum.org. It's just you put in your name, put in your last name, and then put in your email address, and bada bing, bada boom.
Well, you were just at Calvin College, and you're going to be in Washington, D.C., so in less than a minute, can you tell me what you did and what you're going to do?
Yeah, so Calvin College had the opportunity to be able to present some research relative to nationalism, looking at Martin Luther's life and kind of what he did relative to nationalism as a theologian, speaking the nationalistic rhetoric to Germany during his time, but then also what Donald Trump did as well, speaking as an entertainer, businessman, and speaking nationalism, and kind of tried to bring the so what kind of effect is that nationalism in an increasingly diverse society, it can be a negative, but it also can be a unifying positive as well, for us to take pride in our country and to be able to move forward towards those ideals that we hold to be true: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And be going to DC to be able to work with DBU, as well as some of our other organizations that we work with.
Yeah. So again, if you want to connect with either of them, we've got all the links there. And Ryan, thank you for joining us. Let's do this again. I think it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and you two are getting to meet each other. You've known about each other, but got to meet each other on air. So this is great. That's all we have for today. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we've posted all the articles we've talked about on the website, pointofview.net. Would encourage you to join the Truth Team and help us out financially. But most importantly, I want to thank Andrew and Elisa for their help behind the scenes, as well as Shamila. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow on our National Day of Prayer. We'll see you then.
Does Point of View make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with Point of View? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.